to celebrate World Book Day, it would be fantastic if you could dive into a book this week. And some of our staff are going to share some of the books they love. I'm going to start by telling you about a book I read as a teenager, which was called Catcher in the Rye by Jd Salinger. This is my battered copy from then. And it's an interesting book because it's the first book written in the 1950s to identify teenagers as a distinct group. And the main protagonist, Holden Caulfield, is definitely a teenager. He's got slang, swear words, and a red cap. And it's about the fact that when he got expelled from his prestigious school, he ran away to New York, and it's about what happens to him when he gets there and the things that he does and the people he meets. So he goes to visit the ducks on the frozen lake in Central Park and the American Museum of Natural History. And one of the themes of the book is the fact that he doesn't really want to grow up, and he's having a bit of a crisis about becoming an adult and all the responsibilities that will entail. And he loves the exhibits in the museum because they're frozen in time, and it means that they don't have to move on. And he's at that point where he doesn't really want to move on into adulthood. So it's about the people he meets. It's quite funny because he tells little stories about the people he meets and commentates on them, and most of whom he thinks are fake and phony. And the hope in the novel comes from his little sister Phoebe, who arrives with her big suitcase to try and rescue him.
Hello, my book of choice is my 2020 autocourse annual, full of all the data and analysis by all the best journalists who report on Formula One, and it forms a great part of my very nerdy collection, which you can probably see behind me.
I don't really have one particular book that's a favourite, but I do have a favourite author, and that's Gabrielle Garcia Marquez. I first read his 100 Years of Solitude so many years ago, but his book introduced me to the world of magic realism. With his subtle writing, the combination of magical thinking and harsh reality, man's relationship with his past, present, and with the whole natural world.
One of my favourite books is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. It's set in World War II. It is beautifully written and it is a real page-turner.
My favourite book is a book called Naughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. This book is one of my favourites because I remember exactly where I was when I started reading it, and exactly the moment when I realised that the characters in it weren't the race that I thought they were, and it blew my mind. Every moment after that, everything about this book felt really different. The world that it created, the way that it talked about life, and the way that it talked about and challenged perceptions about society and race. It was a really important book for me to read as a teenager, and Mallory Blackman is one really important author in my life, as she wrote books that had young black children in, which was really important for me growing up, to read stories about little girls that looked like me. And I love this book even more because back in 2009 I got to meet Mallory Blackman, and she signed my book for me.
One of my favourite books in recent times is My Sword Hand is Singing by Marquez Sedgwick. It's a gothic horror story, my favourite genre, about vampires in the 17th century Eastern Europe. There are some terrifying moments, but the best thing about it for me, apart from the author's really wonderful writing style, is the way he uses the original vampire folklore of Romania rather than the Hollywoodized version we all know from the movies. This feels genuine and authentic, like the dark fairy tales of much older cultures, and for that, I think, all the more scary.
Yes, I admit it now, I am a railway enthusiast. Now, that doesn't mean I'm one of these train spotters who likes to sit on a platform and take the numbers from the front of trains, but I do love nothing more than to enjoy a day or two travelling on an interesting route around Britain, or sometimes even around other parts of the world. And I tend to get these books as a memento. One of my favourite routes, and something that I still like to look back on, was this really awesome journey that I took when I was a young man with my brother, going from California and crossing America by train. So don't forget that as well as enjoying fiction books as a bit of escapism, non-fiction books can be a really brilliant way to explore your interests.
The book that I would like to nominate as one of my favourites is this book called The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. She's an Indian writer, and this was her very first novel, which came out in 1997, and she actually went and won the Booker Prize, which is a very prestigious book award. I remember reading this in the early 2000s and absolutely loving it. Made all the more special by the fact that I read it when I was in India.
The book I recommend for World Book Day is Terry Pratchett's A Night Watch. It's part of the Discworld series. It's a fantasy crime novel with time travel thrown in the mix. A thoroughly enjoyable read, and one I've listened to on Audible a few times as well. Go and have a look. It's brilliant.
I wanted to recommend this book for World Book Day called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's been translated into 42 languages and it's sold 50 million copies worldwide and counting. It's a philosophical tale about a boy who travels the world in search of treasure and better things and comes to the conclusion at the end about his own life. It's really amazing, and I read it a long time ago, and I then read it in French. And I now read it again from time to time in English. I just love the book.
Mrs. Gatwood's choice of book is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. It's a real classic. I read it about 10 years ago and I would happily read it again today. And I don't say that about many books. It's got a very strong female character. There's also an awesome version of The Handmaid's Tale on Channel 4, I think, which was filmed in the last few years. So that's well worth a watch, but I would recommend that you read the book first.
World Book Day is the day that tells us there are too many books and not enough time. So I've gone with 3 rather than 1. Starting with a classic, G.K. Chesterton's The Man Who Was Thursday. Strange conspiracy about anarchists taking over the world who may or may not actually exist. A bit more up to date, William Gibson's Neuromancer, sci-fi classic that invented the word cyberspace and the whole idea of the Matrix. And if fiction's not your thing and you want to know about the planet that we live on and how it might be changing, then James Lovelock's A Rough Ride to the Future is an absolute classic.